In this recording I will be running through the mark scheme of the higher literature poetry paper for Edexcel English Literature GCSE. There are two sections to this exam. The first, section A, is the unseen poem and section B is the anthology poetry. I will go through both of them one at a time. The mark scheme in front of us is the same mark scheme that any examiner, and they are teachers currently in practice as well as retired, very experienced teachers that will be marking your papers. They will be provided with exactly what you see before you, along with some additional material which will help them understand the analysis of the specific poem in the unseen section. But this is where they begin. Focus your attention on the section at the top, if you will. The first thing that we are presented with as examiners, as markers of your paper, is the assessment objective. And in the first question, section A, the first question, the unseen poem that every student takes, regardless of what section of the anthology they've studied in class, they are looking at assessment objective 2. Now that assessment objective looks at very definite, very certain things. One is language, one is structure, and one is form. And we're also looking at how you explain those three things in terms of the writer's presentation of their ideas, themes and settings. So the key things that the examiner is being asked to look at and focus on is how you, as a reader, and again I would steer clear of the personal account, so I and me is not really necessary in your essay, it is the reader. They are looking at how you can explain the writer's use of language. Now that could include poetic devices, it could include verbs, nouns, adjectives, so the minutiae of the language and the structure of the sentences. Or it could also be looking at the structure of the poem, so how it's laid out on the page, and the order in which the poet has chosen to present the ideas to you, as well as the form of the poem in terms of whether it be a sonnet, for example, so the form which the poem takes. You will see, very much similar to all of your controlled assessments and in any other exam mark scheme that you're presented with, you have 5 bands in this instance, but there are bands and they are associated with the levels that you are given towards the end. So band 0 would mean there is very little there, from 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. 5 being the top of those bands. Now you'll see that in the band below 1, 0, there is no rewardable material within your essay. So that would be very little, or a sentence with nothing of any interest in terms of the exam question. Moving up to band 1, which again the same skills are displayed in each band, but they are to a differing level of sophistication. So if we look at the skills first, the things that they're looking for you to have understood are the same from band 5 all the way down to band 1. You will notice that there are 3 main bullet points as well as an asterisk at the bottom. Now that's the same for every single band if we go up from band 1 up to band 5. So the first bullet point, they are clearly looking for your personal as well as the reader's in general understanding of the content and the ideas of that poem. Again, you won't have seen it before, so just be mindful of that you cannot know anything about the social and historical context necessarily. It is about the reader's first interpretation, and then with a slightly more in-depth look at that, a second and perhaps a third interpretation. So it's what the reader is understanding that poet is trying to get the reader to consider, to think about. The second bullet point is asking the examiner to look at how well you can explain the writer, the poet's use of language, structure and form. So again, that directly links to the assessment objective that we've just been looking at. And they are looking that you link those ideas of language, structure and form with the content and the ideas that you've just been able to point out from that first bullet point. So the initial thing they're looking for is that you understand what the poet is talking about. So the basics of that idea of the poem, the message they're trying to leave with you, and then that you can use those ideas and try to pick out items of language, of structure and of form to explain why you feel they are intending to have a particular impact upon that reader or get a particular message across to their readership. And the final bullet point is very simple. They are asking you to look and point out, pick out if you like, textual reference to support your response. So that simply means that you are selecting quotes that back up your understanding of the ideas and the content of the poem in terms of language, structure and form. Now, textual reference is used instead of quote because clearly you can quote in terms of language because you're picking out specific words that the poet has written, whereas if you have a look at the structural element, you cannot quote the structure, you will need to describe it. So rather than a quote, that would be replaced by a textual reference. So it will be replaced by a description of what you're trying to get, what you're trying to show an understanding of. So perhaps the structure of the poem on the page is very chaotic, moving from side to side, and perhaps you would then move on to explain the fact that that would mean the poet's frame of mind or the character within the poem's frame of mind is chaotic and unstructured. Okay, so as opposed to a quote, you would describe what it looks like on the page, or you would describe the form and what that form entails. So those are the key skills they're looking for you to display. The final asterisk in every single band you will see is based around your spelling, your punctuation and your grammar. Now this is an asterisk rather than a bullet point because it is of lesser importance, although still significant because it's in the mark scheme. But they are looking at that after they have looked at your understanding of the ideas, your analysis of language, structure and form, and your textual reference. So yes, this is important, but the bullet points above are more important. So my advice to you would be, yes, spelling is important, but do not miss out important, significant and mature vocabulary because you're unsure of spelling. Try your best to spell it correctly, but do not miss the word out. And in terms of punctuation, that's a simple task of editing at the end. You are all very sophisticated with your use of punctuation. If you lack that in your writing, it's purely because you have not taken time and care. So leave yourself a space and time at the end to do your editing, to look at the punctuation, to ensure that you're reading it as the examiner would read it, rather than as if you were writing it from your point of view. So if you like, distance yourself from your writing so that you can then go back into it as if you are editing somebody else's work. Again, this takes practice, so make sure you're trying that at home. The final thing I want to point out to you with the unseen section is the difference between band 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So it's the same skills from band 1 to band 5. You will see those same phrases coming in, the content and ideas, the language, structure, form and the textual reference, as well as the spelling, punctuation and grammar. But the difference that you'll spot is the phrasing in which they describe your expression of that. So in band 1 you would be generally sound in terms of addressing all of those skills, whereas in band 2 you wouldn't generally be sound, you would always be sound. There's nothing particularly wrong, you're just not showing that little bit extra. Whereas if you got to band 3, you are becoming thorough in your understanding and your explanation of those ideas, of your analysis of the language. So there'll be a little more detail added. And you'll also be doing it in a sustained manner, meaning you do it all the way through the essay rather than intermittently here and there. If you move up to band 4, you're assured. So it's having that kind of feeling of the confidence behind what you're saying. And you will notice that your punctuation and spelling, grammar, punctuation and spelling rather, is becoming purposeful. So you're really considering the way that you're phrasing things within your essay, and you have edited, you've gone back and checked over, rather than in the previous band it just being appropriate. So you're not doing anything wrong there, but actually what you're doing in the end in the band 4 is that you are thinking about your paragraphing, making sure that your ideas are ordered and that you've clearly spelt things correctly almost all of the time. Up to band 5, you're being perceptive and convincing. Now, when we're talking about being perceptive, we're talking about going into a deeper analysis, thinking a little bit outside of the box. You're not just talking about the same points that other people are talking about. You've really thought about, you know, your poetry analysis. You're confident and you're taking a few risks with the ideas that you're pulling out while still founding it in the clear, thoughtful analysis of your poem that you've been presented with. I hope that this recording has been useful to you, and all the best in your revision, in your practice and in your real exam.